Welcome to Wednesdays with Willa. I am your host, Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. Also goes out on my YouTube channel as well as the Lilydale sites. And it's year 9 of episodes of Wednesdays with Willa. So you've got a lot of archive videos of past shows. I've had wonderful guests throughout the years, and people tell me that they binge watch the shows to their heart's content. It's a treasure trove of information regarding spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I'm always delighted to have a special guest on the show. And today we'll be talking about the stages of the esoteric quest. And today I have with me Leonard George. Hello, Leonard.
Hi, Willa.
I'm so glad that you're back with me again. Leonard's been on the show before. We did a wonderful episode on theology and spiritualism and how they come together. And Leonard is such an expert when it comes to these things because he's a PhD educator, a researcher, a clinician, a writer, a broadcaster, and an international lecturer. So he's many, many things. And he's written several academic papers on schizophrenia, mental imagery, parapsychology, and altered states of consciousness. He has authored 3 books. And Leonard, how about you tell them what the 3 books are? Because they're very involved titles.
Okay, well, I can do a show and tell.
Sure, sure.
Here's one of them. Here's one of them named Crimes of Perception, an Encyclopedia of Heresies and Heretics. Here's another one named Alternative Realities, the Paranormal, the Mystic, and the Transcendent in Human Experience. And the third one I co-edited with my wife, Marjorie Roth. This is the new one called Explorations in Music and Esotericism.
Yeah. Amazing titles. Like amazing subject material that you've been able to accumulate through the years to sift through all of those great ideas and facts and bring them together so beautifully. And yes, we've had Marjorie, your wife, on the show before. She's such a lovely person. I met both Leonard and Marjorie here at Lilydale when they came for the summer and just really enjoy them so much. And that's why I'm thankful Leonard was open to being on the show today to share a bit about his life and how it parallels the understanding of the esoteric quest. I I wanted to start off with, what makes something an esoteric quest, and I started thinking about how it's really about that inner versus outer experience. We have this outer geography terrain that we have, but we have this inner quest that's happening within us on a psychological level, on a spiritual level, and how we exist in this space of myth and archetypes and sometimes paradoxes, right? So we're growing up with this understanding in this human world, and it's really through the direct experience that we start to unfold that transformation of the self. And that's something you've been heavily involved in your lifetime, Leonard.
Sure have. If we want to start by clarifying definitions,
Yes.
esoteric is actually a slippery word because there really isn't a consensus about what it means. But you're right. Obviously, esoteric does point to an interiority, a sense of something valuable, a treasure inside, as opposed to exoteric, which refers to the outside to an extent. So esoteric traditions, esoteric practices do tend to orient our attention to the idea that there's something extremely precious and valuable and transformative in a kind of interior sense. Also, historically, uh, nowadays scholars use the word esoteric often to label traditions that are sometimes called rejected knowledge. These are
Mm.
ways of understanding reality that often have been marginalized, rejected, left behind in some way, but it doesn't mean they have no value. In fact, these esoteric traditions and ideas and practices, I think, are almost like a gold mine. They're a resource that is there. And whenever we might be stuck as a society or as an individual, and we're looking around for another tool or another way of looking at things, another direction to move in, often this gold mine of the esoteric is available for us to mine. So it has tremendous value there. And certainly in my personal life, it's functioned that way. Now,
For
in terms of the quest,
sure.
here's where it gets, I think, really vast. Um, when I was thinking about how to start telling my own personal story, how far back should I go? I thought, well, why stop at birth? Because really, the big picture that my life and everybody's life fits into is a vast and cosmic thing that goes back at least to the origins of life on Earth. Um, I think of the amoeba, right? The little microscopic blob, and it's alive. And what does it do? It's sitting there, but it reaches out. The little pseudopods, those little blobby fingers that reach out from the amoeba. And what's it doing? It's probing the unknown. And to me, the amoeba with its little pseudopod reaching out is really the archetype of the quest. We've got the quest on the cellular level, and it is a characteristic of life itself. Um, we are built, we are motivated, we are made to be curious, to explore. Now, the little amoeba maybe isn't having very many thoughts, but nonetheless, it's manifesting curiosity, it's manifesting wonder. And so, as far as I'm concerned, we can talk about a quest with a structure and stages, perhaps not fixed stages, because every quest is unique. But nonetheless, the core of it is something intrinsic to our own existence. Uh, the wonder, the curiosity is quite innate. So, my own life as someone engaged in a lifelong quest is not special really in any way. I've had some unusual turns, but I suspect the kind of audience we have right now, most of us have had unusual turns in our lives. So, my life, your life, we're just these tiny threads in the vast cosmic story. And who knows if it began or when it began. So that's grand, if not grandiose, going back that far. But when I do think back before my birth, one of the characters in my ancestry that catches attention um, is a fellow named George Wishart, who is a Scotsman and a very rebellious religious thinker in the 16th century, which led to a dire end, in fact. He was burned at the stake for heresy in St. Andrews, Scotland in 1546. Um, and the curiosity can take infinite number of forms. One of the forms it can take is a spiritual or religious curiosity. And so looking back over my genealogy, it seems that there has always been a leaning toward that particular flavor of curiosity going back centuries. And I've got many preachers in my genealogy, leading up to myself. So the quest is for us all. My life is just a small example of that, and one of my variations has been an esoteric quest.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think there are people will see parallels in their own lives as we go through facets of your particular esoteric quest and how it maps out. There is that curiosity. It's like a call to adventure. And one of my favorite coffee cups I have here at my house, it says adventure awaits. And so there is that sense that ordinary life might be small and almost too small or confining to some extent. And then there's this pull toward greater meaning, toward some sort of mystery or depth, right? And so that first stage is that call to adventure. I feel like there's an awakening that happens.
Yeah, yeah, Venture awaits. I would say it's closer than you think. It's standing right behind you right now. So yeah, I think, and as you say, there can be a kind of call, um, but then there has to be a pre-existing responsiveness because I think, again, I think the calling occurs more often than we think, and often we don't notice it. We might go a lifetime without noticing it. Excuse me. Now, in my case, I think curiosity again is part of the ground of what happened to me. Um, I, according to my parents, I was an intensely curious being even as a baby. Now, I don't remember this, but I was told that when I was in a baby carriage and my parents would take me around, my favorite toy was a yardstick. And what I would do, little Lenny would be holding this yardstick in the pram, and I would be exploring things. I'd want to poke everything that was within range, basically to see what would happen. So, that's kind of my founding image of curiosity. And I wish there was footage of this, but I've just been told. So I think, I was intrinsically very curious right from the outset. But in terms of an event um, that started to make this questing more explicit, um, possibly a significant event happened to me when I was 4 years old, and I was playing at a friend's house, and I fell, or possibly was pushed down a flight of stairs. I have no memory of the event itself. I do vaguely remember being at the bottom of the stairs, and there was blood. And it turned out that I sustained a head injury in the fall. And there's various diagnostics done, and it seemed that the injury was kind of diffuse. There was really nothing to be done about it. But as a consequence, throughout my childhood, I had many strange experiences that probably were the result of my little brain struggling to recover and rewire, in effect, from the damage that was done. So I would suddenly lose consciousness sometimes, just fall over and pass out. Part of my body might be temporarily paralyzed for no apparent reason. And I'd have very strange perceptual experiences. And this led, in my little curious mind, to questions. In my childlike way, I was aware of wondering, now, how can it be that if something happens here and all these other things are changed, what is, what really is the nature of things, if that's the case? It seemed to me that I was in here and everything was out there, but if a change here can actually change there, then what's really going on? So obviously I wasn't using this kind of language, but it did raise questions. And the seed of the quest is obviously a question, right? We want to know something. We want to experience, uncover something. So it's very possible that head injury really was a kind of calling for me. And on it went. Now, I changed a little bit after that, as I've described. Several years later, another experience happened that I think was also very significant. I was 9 years old, um, and I was in the Cub Scouts at the time. They would meet every week in the basement of a local church. Now, and so we would meet in the basement, and then my mother, as it turned out, was in the church choir, and they would rehearse in the upstairs while the Cubs were meeting in the downstairs. After the meeting, myself and a couple of the other boys would wait outside for the mothers to finish choir, so we'd go home together. So uh, January 1967, three of us boys were waiting outside the church, and a light rose over the horizon. It was actually the form of a pink-colored disc, followed by a triangle of green lights, and silently it passed overhead. This was a UFO encounter. In the midst of this, my mother came out, so here was another witness. So this very strange thing occurred. Now, nothing fancy, no aliens or contact or anything like this. It was a silent visual experience, but it was amazing. None of us, including my mom, had never ever seen anything like this. So I'd heard about flying saucers, but hadn't paid much attention. And I got very curious about that. And that got me going to the local library and reading books about UFOs. And I noticed other books on the adjacent shelf to the UFO books that were about all kinds of really strange things, paranormal, supernatural, uh, all these topics. And so, of course, I began to check those out, being curious. And I discovered this domain of esoteric traditions in that particular way. So I started with these callings, the questions, and then it began to sort of take shape and direction, coincidentally or not, because of this strange light in the sky. Um, but if you talk to people who've had these kind of encounters, not just with UFOs, so-called, but many other mysterious encounters, um, a lot of people say it wasn't just like an objective encounter. It wasn't just like seeing a jet plane go overhead. If you see a jet plane go overhead, you kind of figure you're aware of it, but it's not aware of you. But many times when people have these uncanny encounters, there's a personal sense to it. There's a sense that, and I had that sense that not only am I aware of that pink disc, in some intuitive sense, I felt it was aware of me. And the fact that I saw it was actually not a coincidence. So there's the sense of a story unfolding here. And at least consciously, we're not the authors of the story.
We are reacting to the story and creating to that extent. But yes, there is an unfoldment. I to your point you made earlier that for some people, even if they have these mysterious things happen that make them start to question the way you did, the way many of us have, there is a refusal of the call too, right? There's the ego is resisting that says, oh, this is too much. I'm not ready, and I'm not ready to change old identity structures. But for those who are willing to see beyond what those structures might be, we honor traditions and structures in that sense and are grateful for foundations. But then we have to look beyond that, and that's where we start to encounter other teachings and guides along the way. And so there is this feeling of the crossing of a threshold, right? It's almost like you can feel there's this energetic threshold when that happens.
Yes, I mean, a good story has structure. It has chapters and all the rest of it. And when I said we're not the authors of it, I'd say we're co-authors.
Yes.
Really, it's a co-created manifestation. And another feature of a good story has to do with timing, right? You have to have the narrative arc
Yes.
and
Yep.
these sorts of structures in there for a really juicy story. And so that has to be sensed and followed to some extent. And so can we be unready for a particular opportunity? Absolutely. As a psychologist, I'm a big fan of defense mechanisms. That comes as a surprise to some people. But
Big
I,
fan.
I think it's very important to have boundaries and maintain them until the time is right, to let down the gate. Um, and so it just has to do with the development of awareness. Obviously, it's helpful to be aware that we have these defenses, but it doesn't mean that it's always healthy to give them up immediately. And so, yeah, you're right. But again, coming back to the notion of grounding, I was, as I say, a very curious and a very sensitive child, and in many ways that has a downside, as we know. Um, but the UFO encounter that I mentioned did seem to be the crossing of a line, and I changed after that. Possibly one of the ways that I changed, and I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but up to that point, I was actually a pretty smart child, but I didn't do particularly well in school. I was, a C student. Um, After the UFO encounter, fairly rapidly, I became an A+ student, and I've stayed that way. I'm 68 now. Um, and basically, all through my entire education to PhD level, I remained that way. Now, maybe that was just my normal development because we go through developmental stages. We don't have to mystify everything. But it is curious to me that this change in my intellectual engagement happened pretty quickly after that UFO encounter. And again, this is not something special. This is something that a lot of people do report. And it can sometimes be problematic crossing these lines because possibly people we're connected to aren't crossing those lines at the same time. And so when these spiritual, esoteric quest transformations occur, it can cause a great deal of stress and strife in relationships. And I'm sure most of us are kind of aware of that particular phenomenon. Um, but I had great parents. They tolerated me and my foibles. And so on I went, suddenly doing a whole lot better in school. But again, those strange library books, I said, what are these things that I'm reading about? What is divination? What is spiritualism? What is witchcraft? And all of the sort of paranormal things that were in these books. So down the rabbit hole I went, as a teenager, checking these things out. Now, by this point, I'd started having mystical experiences as well, particularly when I was alone in nature. This has always been my thing. When that presence becomes clearest to my awareness is in natural settings. And I'd have these very intense experiences out in the woods behind my house. Um, Teasing, tantalizing, because there was something there, but I never really culminated. There was never really closure. So it was a yearning, a beckoning. And again, this is a core feeling to any quest, isn't it? You're not on a quest if it's over. And so, it wasn't over. There was something right there.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a psychological term for this, actually. Most people have heard of déjà vu, the French term déjà vu, referring to an experience that seems oddly familiar. It's as if I've experienced this before, and this is pretty common. Another term is also derived from the French, less well known, is presque vu. Um, so almost seen. And this is what I'm talking about, this sense of tantalizing. Um, uh, you can almost touch it, almost see it, but not quite. And so this was almost a torture for me in my teen years, is this yearning, teasing of something vast that I couldn't quite connect with. But because of the natural setting, I think that's why witchcraft in particular caught my attention. Now, I better say quickly, by witchcraft, what I mean is the neo-pagan reverence for nature that manifests in a whole lot of different ways. I'm not talking about the medieval Renaissance stereotype of the evil satanic witch, etc. That's never been my thing. But I discovered there were these people alive, and they called themselves witches, and they were very oriented toward personifying nature in the forms of nature deities and revering the natural world and valuing it, and crucially, putting human beings within the context of not being separate from that natural world. And that appealed to me a great deal. Another thing that was calling me as a teen was Buddhism. And my father is a suspect in this particular story. Um, One evening he came home from work. I was probably in my mid-teens or early to mid-teens, and he came home from work and he was carrying this great big red plaster Buddha, which he gave to me. I didn't ask for one. I'd never expressed any interest in this, but mysteriously he showed up with this thing. He said, "Oh, I got it at a pawn shop." Now, I've always wondered what he was doing in a pawn shop, but we'll let that aside. But he apparently, this was the story he told me, and he never explained it. I still have it. It's in my meditation room. Um, but this was another little tweak, another nudge from the unknown in the form of my dad. Um, so what is this? And I discovered, in a superficial way, well, there's a lot of meditation going on in Buddhism, apparently. And that appealed to me, the idea that there was actually something that we could do as a practice that might help to address this yearning, that might shrink that distance between whatever it was that was beckoning, whatever it was that was drawing me along this pathway of a quest. And so I got a little book called How to Meditate and started practicing. And it's extremely hard work, right? I think, at least for me, this idea that, oh, meditation, let's meditate, and that's all about relaxing. Well, relaxing is a key skill in meditation, but depending on the goal of your meditation, and this obviously is vast, there are thousands of things a person might be up to when they're meditating, but when you get serious about it, and have a real ambition, um, there's no way around it. It's one of the hardest things I think that we can do is to maintain a regular meditation practice. Strangely, since my mid-teens, I've actually done it. I still have usually about an hour to an hour and a half a day of a meditation practice that I've maintained. And so one of the zillion reasons I'm thankful for my father is he bought me a red plaster Buddha for no apparent reason. Um, so the path begins to take structure. There's witchcraft and there's Buddhism. And so the day after I finished high school, I hopped on a plane to London, England, um, because I'd read in one of these books about some witches in London that were still active. And so I went over to London. I was 17 years old. I tracked them down. I got initiated into that particular kind of witchcraft. And I won't say any more about that, except that um, this sense of a deep reverence for nature, the value of personifying aspects of nature has stayed with me to this very day. That is actually part of who I am. But onward to university I went and followed an academic track for a while, but continued on my esoteric quest at the same time.
Yeah, so you're working your way through those various stages, and I think one of them is that you're kind of excited, but you're letting go of old kinds of foundations, and you're moving into confronting those old patterns and feeling somewhat in between yourselves. There's that feeling that people will go through as they're working through their own quest, and so dreams can intensify during that time. We can find a lot of emotional turbulence because you're having to go through a bit of purification and also shadow work, which is something that you would know a lot about, knowing your background with it. But you feel that there's some trials almost that people will go through, almost symbolic tests that are part of their esoteric quest. So you might notice paradoxes or even inner contradictions or your ego's flaring up about such and such. And there can be some breakdowns and breakthroughs, and there's a lot to this process.
Oh,
And
challenges galore.
yeah, so in this process that you were in of exploring the natural side of life and your feeling of getting into the continuum of that light and the energy of the divine construct and meditating, there was this also this call to study more deeply in that field of psychology, right? So for you to say, all right, I feel that natural world, but I'm going to put myself into a university setting, into the structure, a different kind of structure.
Mhm.
So yeah, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I admire people who are such free spirits that they can find a way through adult life um, without needing overly to engage in convention. And, I'm serious. I have friends who are, artists and such, and I always think how fantastic that you've managed to pull this off to get
Yes.
through, to get through adult life, and stay so centered on your artistry, for example. So one of the big challenges, if you're drawn to this deep quest, is engagement with the conventional world and all of its little demands like money and such, and career and all of that. And so, yeah, that was certainly a challenge for me, like everybody. And I thought one solution to creating that public face and that interaction with the conventional world was psychology. Because for one thing, part aspects of psychology are very amenable to the spiritual side, but psychology itself is actually vast and not perfectly defined. So psychology has a very hard physical aspect to it. When we talk about biological psychology and the study of the brain and the nervous system and that aspect of it, that is psychology, neuropsychology. We can study behavior and behavioral psychology, and that's pretty solid as well. We can talk about psychodynamics. So we look at the mind and the consciousness and unconsciousness. That's getting a little more woolly. And then we continue out and we can hit the transpersonal end of the spectrum of psychology. And that is looking at states of consciousness and meditation and even wisdom. Wisdom as a technical term in psychology. And so psychology was a great place for me because it afforded a vast range of exploration. It actually led to employment, which was handy. Um, and so for many years, I did pursue that kind of training, got a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's degree in clinical psychology, a Ph.D. in clinical psychology over that span of time. But I was always also engaged in uh, the spookier stuff that I'm drawn to during, that same phase. Um, One of the areas literally adjacent to psychology that I became very intrigued by was parapsychology. So parapsychology. Um, and again, there are many definitions about that, but my definition was very strict scientific approach to looking at the possibility of extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. And there's a tradition of studying these things in a laboratory setting, trying to control the variables just like scientists do. And so parapsychology, by my definition, is actually a kind of science. And I was very interested in a laboratory in North Carolina. It was ended up being called the Institute for Parapsychology. That started in 1939, founded by the famous J.B. Rhine. Now probably everybody knows those little ESP test cards with the star and the squiggly lines and the square, etc. They're from Rhine's lab, in North Carolina. And so for decades, they were really the world leaders in doing this more quantitative scientific approach to looking at these things. And they seemed to be getting results, and I was fascinated by that. But I thought, this is almost unbelievable to my scientific mind, which I was developing along with these other sides of myself. How do I even believe this? What if these people are crooks? What if they're all frauds, like some people are saying? And I thought the only way I'm going to get to the bottom of this is to go down there and meet them and hang out with them. So that's what I did. Um, First of all, I went down for a summer study program. And then after, when I was working on my master's degree, I was actually hired by the Institute for Parapsychology as a research fellow. And so I went down for a few years, lived in Durham, North Carolina, and did parapsychological research, which was quite fascinating to take that particular approach. It certainly enriched my understanding. And by the way, they're not frauds. I mean, every field has their frauds, as we know, but that's not what was going on, in parapsychology. Um, One of the things that struck me was that in some ways, the research done in parapsychology was more rigorous than the research being done in conventional psychology, which is a heretical thing for a psychologist to say. But I
Yes.
come from a lineage of heretics, um, particularly because the claims of parapsychology from a conventional standpoint are so outlandish that, a study would be published with amazing results and a skeptic would come around and poke holes in it. And the parapsychologist had to respond by tightening the research design, tightening, to eliminate any even imaginable, even implausible conventional explanations. So the only explanation left was the paranormal one. And if you look at psychological research, a lot of the precautions and safeguards that parapsychologists took are absent in psychological research. And this has actually come home to roost, in recent decades when it's been discovered that an awful lot of the published research in psychology, and not just psychology, but many other scientific fields, when you actually try and replicate them, do them again, you get a different result. So I'm very pro-science, don't get me wrong. Science has all kinds of flaws, but when you compare it with the alternative, it's extremely valuable aspect of our quest. Having said that, it is a human endeavor. And when I think of humans, I think of monkeys in lab coats when it comes to science. We bring our animal nature into the laboratory. And we have our biases and prejudices, and science does try to control and minimize those things. But at the end of the day, we're monkeys in lab coats. It gets through. So parapsychology was another important formative path for me. And of course, when you look at parapsychology, you're going to learn about spiritualism because the history of parapsychology is
Woven.
completely entwined with it. And before we talk about parapsychology historically, we talk about psychical research. Many of the founders of psychical research, of course, were spiritualists, and historically, there's actually a lot of tension there. But these are siblings, basically, looking at this mystery. So, of course, got very curious about seances and mediums. Who are these people? How do they do it? Are they crooks? Right? Um, so, fortunately, a little later in life, I did manage to cycle back. um, but again, the moment I finished high school, I hopped on a plane. The moment I got my Ph.D., I hopped on a plane. Instead of launching into this career as a psychologist, I decided to go to China. And I spent several months wandering around Asia, checking things out. And of course, Buddhism was a great curiosity for me, but I traveled extensively throughout Asia, um, and got myself into as much trouble as I could, exploring sacred sites and various practices and traditions that were there. And that's been a major part of my quest, has been literal travel. Now, the esoteric quest, the spiritual quest, isn't by definition literal movement, literal travel, but very often it is. And for many of us, it's incredibly enhancing. We have the notion of the pilgrimage, for example, throughout history, going to places that are special. Again, why do we go? Because we're called, because there's a magnetism, there's some kind of draw there. And so I wanted to go. I was drawn to places with very disparate traditions and histories and backgrounds. And throughout my life, I've traveled extensively around the world. Every opportunity, I've had to go to these places. Sometimes I've simply taken large chunks away from any kind of conventional work and wandered around. I'm probably responsible for some abominable snowman sightings. This ragged guy wandering the Himalayas, which I actually did. Um, but again, this is a very enriching thing, but it can also be confusing. It can also be a pitfall, coming back to this notion of, the challenges, because I certainly met people in my travelers, fellow corks drifting in the ocean. And it was striking that, and this may actually be true of all of us, not two groups of individuals, but on some level, we're going towards something by doing this. On another level, we might be escaping or avoiding something by doing this. And I often had the sense in my fellow travelers, and they were probably just a mirror for me, that it wasn't entirely wholesome. This restlessness, this jumping around the planet. Um, we're looking for something, but are we avoiding a very important aspect of the quest? Because, as I say, travel in a literal sense is external. It's external movement. And sometimes I think we engage in external movement in order to um, give ourselves an excuse not to engage in painful internal movement. So none of this is actually straightforward. The quest is non-linear. It's more like a lightning bolt. Lots of zigs and zags, at least in my experience, I have to say.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. It's not a linear concept, and it can fold in on itself. It's almost on this quantum field level. It's folding in on itself and spiraling at times. And you're right, there's this uh, opportunity when we travel to step outside of our old routines, our habits that we formed, go see what it's like somewhere else, and kind of put that part of life on hold. And I'll never forget the time I actually traveled and I came back home and I was like, no, this isn't my home anymore. And then I moved because it was important for me to have stepped away to realize what I do and don't want. And so that's what starts to happen in a person's esoteric quest. You start to firm up for yourself what is correct for you. And
Yeah.
so there are these moments of clarity that we can have that all of a sudden we didn't have before. And the insight can feel very effortless. And so as you're talking about traveling the world, and I know you went all kinds of places. You went Mongolia, Tibet, India, Egypt, Syria, Greece, Iceland, Guatemala, Peru, like all these places, right? And you're having these experiences, but you're also starting to allow yourself to be intuitively guided. And by having that travel experience, you started to kind of get into a deeper trust of your own alignment with the divine, right? There was a rhythm of respect and knowing that you are being cared for and protected by
That's
doing
right.
this travel, right?
We're co-authoring the story. We're co-authoring the whole story. And of course, the beauty of it is we don't actually know what the other author is up to. And so it's full of
Sometimes
surprise.
we do. Sometimes we do.
Another of my mild surprises and another sort of constellation that emerged um, was in the 90s when some great scholars published some books that I happened upon and really opened my eyes to yet another dimension of this, which is the dimension of the ancient Mediterranean spirituality. Um, and one of the threads there that really caught my attention was something called Hermetism. And this was a movement that arose in Hellenistic Egypt, right around the time of Christ, actually, focused on this legendary figure of Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest Hermes, who was kind of a mythological amalgam of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth. And a small literature has survived from this particular esoteric school, which I thought was really fascinating and profound. Closely related to that is the tradition called Neoplatonism, based on the works of Plato, but some people in succeeding centuries amplifying what you might call the more experiential and esoteric aspects of the teachings of Plato. Plato sometimes is regarded as kind of a downer in terms of spirituality and esotericism. But I think those are from people who are misreading what Plato is actually up to. It's clear from reading the Neoplatonic interpretations that Plato and certainly these Platonists had a beautiful and elegant way of understanding unseen aspects of reality and how to participate in those. So I really got hooked on the Hermetic and the Platonic esoteric aspects, which led me to another huge turning point. There was a conference in Florence, Italy in the year 2000 on these themes because it turned out that in Renaissance Italy, centered on Florence in the 15th century, there was a great reawakening of interest in Hermetism and Neoplatonism. And so I went to a conference in the city of Florence itself, which was astonishing. It was created by a fellow named Ralph White. And it turned out that this conference was part of a series that he had started. And this series continues until this very year of 2026, that has come to be called the Esoteric Quest. And so pretty well every year, Ralph organizes a conference somewhere in the world focusing on the esoteric aspect of that location. And so in that year, it was Florence. It was fantastic. I've gotten involved in this Esoteric Quest project, and I've been presenting at all of the quests pretty well ever since 2000. But the most important thing that happened to me in Florence was I met a woman. Um, that's where I met my beloved Marjorie. And as I often say about this, there's a bylaw in Florence that not too many people know about, but being law-abiding, I followed the bylaw. And it's this: if you go to Florence and you're single, you have to fall in love with somebody. That's the law. And so we followed that law. And so Marjorie has been the light of my life for the last 26 years. And so Florence was really quite pivotal, both in terms of these organized esoteric quests, which have proved a fantastic opportunity for my own travel to many of these locations that these quests have been in. Now, about meeting Marjorie, this is actually significant because years later, Marjorie told me that before she met me, I think it might actually have been the year before she met me, she went to Lilydale. She had curious, she'd heard, I think she had a friend who was interested in spirituality and went to Lilydale sometimes. And so Marjorie went to Lilydale, had the great blessing of having a session with Dr. Judith Rochester, who is known as the medium's medium. And so Marjorie had a session with Judith, and Marjorie told me that Judith was saying in the session that Spirit is informing me that there's someone who lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, in Canada, who loves you very much. And Marjorie said, I don't know anybody in Vancouver. You must be thinking of Vienna, because Marjorie knows a lot of people in Vienna. But Judith was apparently insistent, saying, no, it's actually Vancouver. So anyway, in the year 2000, when I went to Florence, I lived in Vancouver. And so Marjorie has concluded that I was prophesied. And so, of course, I agree. Um,
Yes.
but, you know, this is the kind of thing that catches one's attention. So Marjorie and I have always enjoyed going to Lilydale. I'd never been before. I'd heard about it, but I'd never, been involved or gone to, this wonderful center of spiritualism, and enjoyed that. And then I had a golden opportunity actually to take a class in mediumship from none other than Judith Rochester herself, which was a real high point for me, and very, very profound, of course, because one of my questions was, we have these strange beings called mediums, and they sit there and they say all these things based on what they're experiencing. What are they experiencing? What is that like? Is it like anything that I experience, or is it some completely alien category of experience? And I thought, well, the only way that I can figure this out is actually to do it. And, so, Judith was fabulous in helping us in this particular class, try and open that particular door. And I had my own experiences during the class that I shared with Judith, and she verified that, yeah, that's it. That's what us mediums are talking about. And so that was very validating for me. Now, the practice of mediumship isn't something that I have developed with any discipline. Since then, I would never call myself a medium. I mean, even during the course, I would call myself a mini medium, because all the other students were actually mediums. As I say, Judith is the medium's medium, so I was the baby. But I'm glad that I have this door that's ajar. And when I want to, I can settle myself down and I can access that space that I discovered in Judith's class. Those presences are available to me, and I suggest available to us all. And again, who am I talking to right now? One of the masters, Willa White. So, you know. Um, but As a little baby, I actually know a wee bit as well. And so spiritualism was another spice that entered my spicy spiritual quest at that particular point.
That's so beautiful. And I mean, I enjoy a good love story. So I love your love story that you have with Marjorie, and how you had gone through this arc in your understanding of your own life, that you were ready for that love, that deeper understanding of love. And I'm seeing that as part of you being willing to enter into that mystery, that being vulnerable and entering into that love means that you will trust. And that's a big part of the journey.
Well, the love aspect of it has been tough for me. That didn't come easily or quickly or early in my own particular path for all kinds of reasons, a couple of which I'm conscious of. Um, but that warmth, that moistening had to be added to what was for me something that had a slightly more intellectual or mental bent as opposed to that core warming bent. Um, but we all start somewhere with certain things that are more salient than others. And then the mission, should we decide to accept it, is to cultivate more of a balance. And so in my case, I was a smart little kid, and UFOs zapped my brain and made it grow in a certain sense. Um, but the heart required longer. And of course, I'm still working on all of this. I only offer myself as an example of a quest that everyone's familiar with, not with any further claim than that. So, this is the beginning of a work in progress that we're really talking about. But obviously another key feature of any kind of spiritual or esoteric quest is the uneven development. Um, and, Carl Jung, of course, most famously, regarded the soul, the psyche, as a series of opposites that can strive for balance, but always starts, in a situation of imbalance.
Mhm.
And there's a great deal of suffering involved in doing this, of course, because I never wanted to show anyone my heart. My goodness. As I say, I love defense mechanisms, especially intellectualization in my case. So, the Great Wall can come down. And as I say, a work of the lifetime in my particular case. For other people, of course, it's going to be different. They're hearty from the beginning, and they will have to sustain the suffering of developing the other aspects and complementing it. The good news is at the end is that uh, it ends up being a kind of paradoxical harmony. Um, and so,
Because it's a union of opposites that starts to happen.
yeah, uh, from one perspective, that's conceptually impossible. Um, but in reality, it's not, right? And so here is where we glimpse the idea of getting past conceptualization. Um, and that sounds, again, very heady, but when you live it, when you actually notice what we're supposed to notice, it's not just heady at all. It's as full of heart as it is full of head. Um, and I'm still at it, as I say. One of the most valuable things for me is a meditation practice, an ongoing meditation practice. I found that going on retreats in the woods is a very useful thing to do, and I try and do that every year. Head up to the woods of northern Ontario and spend time by myself in a cabin, and can really settle and focus more clearly that way. So I really recommend uh, some kind of regular discipline. As I
Mhm.
say, meditation is kind of a vast thing. There are many practices, but
But solitude
but
is important to
regular
have
practice
that.
is a key. This is unfortunate, is that there are benefits that only come from regular practice. Not just one weekend a year or a special occasion. Those can certainly have their value, and things that have beyond our control, nothing to do with our practice, extremely valuable. But there's no replacing a discipline of some kind of regular practice in my own experience.
I would agree with that because that solitude is very necessary component of balancing out things. I'm hearing a little feedback, so I don't know if you have your speakers on funny, but when I speak, I can feel that. So I apologize to anybody who's watching and or
We're
listening to
not
that.
alone. We're just not alone. Yeah, I'm hearing a bit of a
Okay.
clicking.
Yeah.
So don't
So
know what.
I just wanted to get people through this the stages in the arc before we focus on some of that spiritual understanding. So to begin with, you had this ancestral call, almost like a call before the call because of your genealogy, right? You found people in the family for you that in the generations that had that understanding of the divine spark. And then through your childhood, you had those first thresholds that you were experiencing, the injury that you had it for the UFO encounter at the age of 9, your discovery of those books, and then you were entering into those great mysteries. And so you were departing from what people would consider the ordinary world. And then through your early adulthood, you were meeting mentors, you were practicing, you were studying, you were really focused on your inner work of meditation and also thoughtful endeavor as seeing other people's um, thinking together and linking that. And then you had the what I call the wanderer phase, right? You had that pilgrimage and those different roads of trials as you're journeying and what you need to do as far as expanding that worldview and going internally, but also externally in that experience. And then from what I'm understanding of your journey, that you did the dive into all of the Plato and the Renaissance and all of those things and the teachings that those would, so that would be like the illumination phase in the Esoteric Quest. And then you had your meeting of the goddess, Marjorie. This idea of that union.
I should add that I married the goddess too.
You married the goddess, yes. And that kind of anchored you even further in that transformation because when you declare you're going to have union with someone, then you have to balance. So it's a whole new way of balancing, and that love becomes part of the spiritual path. And then you coming to Lilydale and meeting with Judith, the wonderful Judith, who's one of my mentors as I was developing as a medium. And it's such a beautiful thing that you were able to start to integrate, not just observe that there were mediums, but you said, let me try this and just put my toe into it, as it were, and see if I can feel that return, that eternal curiosity rising up in me that cares about this, and that I will synthesize this into my own path, that I will distill the wisdom of direct experience. Right. So in the esoteric quest, people don't shy away from the direct experience, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, your summary is so perfect that I think I've just learned something about myself I wasn't aware of before. You kind of shown the arc. And of course, central to this is that the arc is not linear. It's going to be like this. And it's going to be different for everybody. So, this is the danger when we talk about stages, is falling into the notion of a kind of prescribed, rigid stage model. We humans don't really do that. Um, but yeah, that sense of movement. And it's not over yet. I'm sure there's more. I don't know what it is, but I'm still being beckoned. Um, but just to say, where I've arrived, even though I'm still on the move, to try and summarize all of this in a simple way to myself, I take an image from Platonism. It's a wheel, and the top of the wheel is the one. This is a term in Platonism that's often used to describe the ultimate, the divine, the source, etc. And in this sense, one is actually not really a number. It's not part of a number line, one, two, three. One basically means something that transcends that. So the top of the wheel is the one, the bottom of the wheel is the many, and this is where we live. We live in the world of the many. It seems like there are many things separate from each other. It seems like I am separate from all of those things. This may be an illusion, but this is where we are. And the wheel is in motion. And the upward side of the wheel, when we participate in it, is curiosity. This is how this sacred mystery manifests in our daily life, is the curiosity of the amoeba, of the human, our little pseudopod reaching into the wonder. So one of the movements of the world, one of the movements of this wheel between the many and the one, is curiosity, reaching through the veil, wondering what we're going to learn. The other side of the wheel coming down is creativity. This is the mysterious manifestation that can sometimes happen through us. It happens through everything by which we engage in the creation of the world. We are co-creators of the world. So reaching up through curiosity, manifesting down into the world of the many through creativity. And the hub of the wheel for me is caring. This is love. This is compassion. This is what centers the entire thing. And the main reason I like the word caring is it begins with the letter C, and so does curiosity, and so is creativity, so I can remember this. It's the three C's. But this is kind of the motif, after all of this decade of running around and meditating and all of these sorts of things, if I tried to summarize it in a straightforward way, that's it. Might not seem like much for all that work, but it's kind of what I've got as I approach my 70th year, and onward. But I had a thought when I was in Judith's workshop. One of the assignments was to write a poem or a prayer of some kind. And so one afternoon during that time, I was out behind the Leland Inn, and thinking about this assignment, and it came to me basically as a chunk. And it actually, I think, summarizes what I just said in terms of this reaching up and moving down. And so I thought it might be a fun capstone actually to share this,
Yeah, yeah, we
this
want you to
little.
share that because you're right that that next part of the stage is that service to others. You're naturally wanting to help other people and be a stabilizing influence and connected to
Mhm.
something larger. So yes, please share your prayer.
Yeah. So yeah, this was my homework that came. And by the way, I don't pretend to understand what it all means. Um, so here's how it begins. We call to the spirits who are one spirit. We call to the gods who are one God. Come down to us now and help us rise to you. Come down as a hunting owl. We rise as a crescent moon. Come down as a hand of lightning. We rise as a wand flung high. Come down as a ruby sword. We rise as a cup of emerald. Come down as a bounding deer. We rise as a ravenous lion. Come down as an eye of gold. We rise as a crystal mirror. Help us humbly to know, for the healing of all, that all lives are one nature, that all forms are one body, that all thoughts are one mind, that all loves are one heart, that the infinite multiplicity is the simple unity, the sunlight, the diamond light, the one light, the one. I'm not sure what that means, but I think it means something like what I said with the wheel.
Well, it's beautiful and so much symbolism, right? There is an increased symbolic and understanding of the experience on a synchronistic level, and there's a deeper structure to that reality, and it's reflected in your prayer. And so beautiful to feel the inner truth of that. And it's very much part of the esoteric quest. And even though, this is the capstone to our discussion today, our conversation about the stages of the esoteric quest and how your life has been reflective of those things. It's also, as you say, it's that circle, that wheel that is continuing. So it's like to be continued, the ellipsis.
Well, as you said earlier, it's not actually a circle. I think it's more of a spiral. I think your image is the best image of a spiral.
Oh, yeah, this is spiral approach to learning that we have. And there's this growing capacity, which each cycle round to shed old identity and to grow in capacity for our introspection and pull toward the wisdom traditions as you have been drawn yourself. And many of us are going to allow ourselves to feel guided, even when we can't explain by what. So even though you don't understand all the elements of your prayer right now, not necessary to understand all those components. It'll come in the right time. Yes.
We have to have some faith.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, this has been such a great dive into the esoteric quest, Leonard. We really appreciate you sharing the various aspects of your life and trying to encapsulate that. And that was, I know, very difficult because it's so vast. But we really do appreciate you coming on the show today to share that with us.
Well, thanks for the chat. It was fun.
Absolutely. And just want to share with people, tune in next week for another great episode of Wednesdays with Willa. And I want to make sure I mention I do have a upcoming class that focuses on the soul's journey. So if you've been very interested by our episode for today, you're going to want to take that class with me in March and enjoy learning more about that mode. I'll have some guided meditations and exercises for you to work through in that particular workshop. And I'm really looking forward to being able to teach that. I'll have also a new round of my mediumship development circles that you can go ahead and get registered for. Always something more to learn and grow and be. And I'm so thankful for this opportunity to share with all of you various viewpoints from around the world. And you can see how much we do fold in that which is wisdom, inner clarity, illumination, and purpose. And again, I thank Leonard for being here on the show today and everybody for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, follow. Let us know you like the show and leave beautiful comments. We love knowing that you're connecting with the information shared. All right, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.